Is Warframe the worst MMO ever created? It's actually a question that has been asked and answered by a lot of people at this point. Since the game is around 9 years old of actually being released, that gives people 9 years worth of Warframe to judge, hate, love, or just not care about, right? Warframe is kind of a weird MMO. It's a shooter, looter shooter styled MMO reminiscent of Destiny and most other games where you just grind stuff for the sake of grinding stuff or getting your number a little bit higher. Pretty normal gameplay loop cycle. You farm things, you level things up, you get more things, your damage or numbers go up, or you just get more things for the sake of using more things. Rinse, repeat. That is essentially what is Warframe. It's not an open world MMO by any means. It's all instanced in missions, and then there are open world hubs, but there's no massive open world area where you'll be seeing tons of people running around, questing, chatting, etc. It's all an instanced game. So let's talk about, is Warframe the worst MMO created? We'll go through the early game, mid-game, end-game, and just talk about the game in general, as it's a friggin' big game and there's a lot of shenanigans around the game. So if it helps or if you enjoy, remember to like, subscribe, and comment down below your thoughts on Warframe, because many people have played it over the years, and that means many people have judged it over the years, so let me know. Early game in Warframe is kind of a weird and confusing time, but for obvious reasons. You're new to the game, you have everything to discover, you have to get used to the gameplay loop, the cycle, the system, so everything will take a little bit of time. You'll notice that the game is definitely free to play, as it has a lot of daily cap type systems, it has a lot of wait timers, and it has a lot of forced stopped progression when you're early on into the game, mainly based around foundry, resources, and build timers. But once you start getting used to the game, you'll realize, hey, maybe it's not that bad. You might like it, you might hate it, but you'll realize at least that it is a fast-paced shooter where the idea is you farm things, you get stronger, and you level up your account, characters, weapons, and general build setups. There are unique systems such as modding systems, which is how you increase your base damage for warframes and weapons essentially, and that's how you can eventually get crazy wild things such as mods that make you invincible for a certain amount of time, mods that make it so that you can't die, mods that increase your health hundreds of percent, your damage hundreds of percent, so on, so forth. There's a ton, but that's really all you care to know for the sake of this video. There are also mods, I should say, that change around how abilities on Warframes work, so that's where a big amount of the gameplay customization will come. It's between swapping around Warframes, weapons, and then the builds behind those. So that's early game, essentially learning the game, learning the systems, finding out if you like the game, going through the main story quest, doing any of the side quests, and unlocking the game, right? It's pretty standard, pretty normal video game MMO early game experience. You're just like, oh, this is all new. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you'll hate it. Collect resources, continue through the main story, and unlock the game. Through playing a lot of Warframe though, you'll quickly realize that a lot of the gameplay is the same. A lot of weapons after a while tend to just be same old, but that's when you'll start to get into, that's right, mid-game. We're now hitting mid-game, where you've started to unlock a good portion of the game, the star chart, you've done a good amount of missions, right? You have, let's say, a handful of warframes, maybe you have way more weapons over warframes, or maybe you have way more warframes over weapons, but most likely at this point you've farmed up some items, you've farmed up a good amount, but you haven't unlocked all of the systems because, let's be honest here, mid-game is still unlocking the game. Warframe is such a massive game with many side systems that are, honest to God, 100% optional, because a lot of side systems either don't matter or it's just stuff you don't care or want to do. For example, in mid-game you can lock things like Railjack. Oh, right, that's a whole space game mode side system. Issue is a lot of people just straight up don't like it, so they choose to skip that part of the game where they just don't want to collect warframes or weapons using the weird space game mode, but that might hinder them later on in the game because they'll have to complete main story quests or missions where you do need to use the space game mode. And it just seems a little shoehorned in, but you might love it. You might have so much fun exploring all of the differences in the game and game modes across Warframe. There's a ton of side things, social things, clans that you can go to, so you might enjoy it a lot. Who's to say until you truly get there? But your early game experience will generally give you a good understanding of what your mid-game or fun in Warframe will be. So there's just essentially more to do. At this point, you're probably pretty strong and you can do more things. So you can have multiple builds around your Warframes and weapons. You can either try to mod things to the extreme or just have general builds on everything. Maybe you're the type to auto mod because you just don't care. Auto mod sucks, but like, hey, it works, ? Depending on what you're trying to do, maybe. So you could really do a lot of things mid-game, but the same old of Warframe is still mid-game. You're going to be collecting weapons, Warframes, items, and just continuing your way across the game, finishing up all of the story quests, all of the nodes in the game. Maybe at this point you've unlocked Steel Path. Maybe at this point you're getting close to unlocking the new war, Zariman, right? Who knows how far into the story you are when you're around mid-game, because it's really hard to say. Your MR matters a little bit, but not too much. Once you get MR 16, you're basically good to go for most, if not everything in the game. So, hey, it's fun times there. You just keep farming, but it might at this point be a bad MMO experience because you're not used to seeing people everywhere. It's all just kind of optional weird social systems, and you could do the game 100% on your own. There's literally zero requirement to ever play with someone in the game, essentially. And that's kind of weird for an MMO. So we get to this point, you've done dungeons essentially and everything if you've chosen to, solo or with a team. So it just turns out to be kind of a weird MMO experience so far. Maybe you've chosen to partake in clans, but you don't have to. It's a major part of the game and it includes many warframes and weapons, but with everything, yeah, you don't have to if you don't care to. At this point, let's get on to endgame. Let's say your endgame in Warframe, right? Essentially, you should be able to do most, if not all, single nodes in the game, whether that be solo in a party. You should have somewhat competent Warframe builds, weapon builds, because you need to be able to take on high-level enemies, generally capping out at around 150 to 200, depending on how much Zariman you play, or if you're going for C-drop rotations. You could always technically play the game until it hits level 9999 on any sort of endless game mode, if you have what it takes, but that is truly and purely an optional thing that you can do in the game. A lot of people have a lot of fun with it though, because, you know, fair enough. Big numbers go burr, high-level enemies die. It's pretty interesting. You just do have to have specialized builds. But at this point in the game, endgame, you should have most general mods that you need to pull off endgame builds. Even if you don't have all of them, you should have most to be able to throw together a good endgame build. And this is where you hit the issue in Warframe. You could be endgame at around master rank 20 or 30. It really doesn't matter. You could even do it around master rank 15 if you're really just finishing off the entirety of the game without leveling Warframes and weapons. But once you've hit endgame in Warframe, there's nothing to do other than just the same old gameplay cycle of collect weapons, Warframes, and items until the end of time, because there's no real PvP aspect in the game that matters, and there is PvP, don't get me wrong, but it also daily caps you out of any point in playing it. The game has mostly daily, weekly, monthly, what have you caps, and they aren't like amazing caps, and they're really easy to hit too, so might be a good reason for you to stop playing the game. At this point, Warframe is one of the worst MMOs ever created. Essentially because you can do everything solo, and it's one of the more confusing messes of a game. the systems it has in place are thrown all around and they don't really mesh well together. Railjack, Arcwing, Necromech. We have open worlds that aren't open worlds that are just smaller instances. It's essentially just like a small little mission tile. They aren't true open worlds by any means, but hey, you can go into missions with 1 to 4 of your friends, so it's kind of an MMO. And that's how you hit endgame. You're like, oh god, wait, is this a weird MMO or is this a single player multiplayer game? Well, it's both, right? That's the thing. We've hit the stage where most MMOs and just most games are active developed, right? And they have enough social systems and players to just constitute that they're a full massive multiplayer online game or MMORPG, you know, maybe it's role-playing game. It all sort of gets mixed in together. So that's Warframe, baby. I wouldn't say it's a good MMO in any stretch of the imagination. All of the end game cycles in Warframe are just running weeklies for the sake of running weeklies, and it has no actual true end game where you progress any farther once you've hit mid game. It's just you kind of just keep going to farm stuff if you want. And then you wait on updates, as that's somewhat usual for most games. It doesn't have raids, it has somewhat bosses, but those can be all completed, usually in under 10 minutes. I think Eidolon speedrunners can get pretty insane, do it like, what, 5-minute runs or maybe something like that, because they can do 6 entire runs at night, so things can get pretty wild. But again, there's no real reason to do that other than you want to do that, so yeah, it's a weird MMO. It doesn't have raids, really. It has bossing, but it doesn't have really anything that resemble endgame MMO raids. So it has PvP, but it has no competitiveness to it. PvP kind of sucks and no one plays it. It has a lot of side systems that no one plays, but it has just so many game nodes that it's hard to find people playing every single game node too. So that's generally Warframe, baby. Is it a good MMO or is it a bad one? Well, I think it would be constituted as kind of a bad MMO. It's more like a general multiplayer game with weird MMO light features thrown in there, and it's never really been a true MMO to a lot of people. So it's a decent game. Mid to early game's pretty fun. End game can get kind of boring, but that's not too surprising with most other games. So, it is what it is, right? Let me know what you think about Warframe. Is it the best MMO? Is it the worst MMO? Either way, we've had a lot of videos in the past couple of years of people calling it terrible MMO, good MMO, weird MMO, okay MMO, terrible game to get into, great game to get into, awful game to play. Fun game to play, right? There's a lot of up and down reviews for Warframe, well deserved either way, so let me know what you think. Thank you all for watching. That's it for this video. Like, sub, comment down below. But I just want to have a little video talk about Warframe being the worst MMO, as it's been a good talking point over the years. So thank you all for joining, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.